My name is Martin Graves. Today, I want to tell you the story of the week my own son broke my heart by saying, "I can't afford to feed an extra mouth." Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and share in the comments where you're watching from. The first week after I left my warehouse shifts for good, Aaron sat across from me at dinner, set his fork down, and told me flatly, "We don't need another mouth to feed in this house." Then, without asking what I wanted, he said he could get me to work as a cleaner. I smiled like I agreed, letting quiet resentment sit behind my eyes. He had no idea he'd just stepped into something he couldn't control. Earlier that day, I'd walked out of my job for the last time, feeling lighter than I had in years. 38 years of service, done. I came home expecting my son and his wife, Tasha, to raise a glass with me, maybe even open that cheap bottle of wine we saved for rare occasions. Instead, silence spread across the table like cold fog. Aaron's face turned a shade darker, and he blurted, "You just quit? Without thinking about what that means?" "I've earned this," I told him. 38 years, son. I thought we could celebrate." Tasha's voice sliced into the space between us, piercingly blunt. "Celebrate? You mean live here for free?" She set her glass down with a thud. The moment soured fast. I'd imagined Aaron smiling, telling me he was proud. Instead, his expression held thinly veiled irritation. He leaned forward, slipping into an authoritative tone. "You're not staying here unless you work. I don't care what you do. Bag groceries, stock shelves, whatever. You're not living on my paycheck." I stared at the man whose education I'd paid for, whose marriage celebration I'd funded, whose home was under my name. Tasha nodded like a judge agreeing with the verdict. "Martin, you're 64, not 90. Mr. Callahan works at 72. You can too." I barely touched my plate. The chicken casserole Tasha made, my favorite, now sat heavy and cold. "You're right," I murmured, my voice low enough to sound beaten. "That's better," Aaron said, relaxing a fraction. "We can't afford to be dependent." That word stung more than any insult. They gathered their plates and went to the living room, the television snapping on as if nothing had happened. I sat alone, staring at their empty chairs until the creak of the house reminded me the night was moving on without me. Later, lying in my small back bedroom, I watched headlights sweep across the ceiling. 38 years of work, and my reward was to be treated like an unnecessary burden. Photos lined my dresser. Aaron's commencement ceremony, his wedding day, holidays when we all looked happy. Now they felt like artifacts from a life I might have imagined. Through the thin wall, their voices drifted in. "Can't believe he just announced it," Aaron said. "He thinks he can sit here on my dime." Tasha replied, "If he refuses to work, we'll take his pension and put him in a care facility. I'm tired of carrying him." The words froze me. Care facility. Unnecessary burden. My grip tightened on the bedsheet. Tasha kept going, her tone casual. "He's been eating here for free since Eleanor died. 2 years. And now he's done working? He's got some nerve." Aaron laughed bitterly. "Utilities, groceries, insurance. He thinks it's still cheap like decades ago. Maybe we give him a deadline, 1 week to get a job, or he's out." I closed my eyes, each word sinking deeper than the last. They had no idea what that decision would cost them. Their laughter slipped through the wall, light, casual, and cutting. "If he complains, we'll just remind him you take what you get," Aaron said. They found the thought amusing enough to chuckle over. I stayed still, absorbing each word as though it were a stone dropped into my chest. These were the people I had worked for, sacrificed for, loved without limit. My son, the boy I'd taught to balance on 2 wheels, the child whose fears I'd calmed, now saw me as an unnecessary expense. The phrase care facility echoed in my head like a slow, steady drumbeat. They'd already plotted it out, strip my pension, ship me off, and never look back. I thought of old coworkers who left the job with engraved clocks or surprise parties. Paul Maddox had been given a mountain cabin trip by his kids. Marjorie Lane's family threw her a bash at the lakeside banquet hall. My reward: threats over cold chicken casserole. But the shock didn't stay. Beneath it, something sharper formed, calm, deliberate, and focused. If they wanted a game, I could play better. I'd been underestimated before, and I'd survived worse. In the quiet, my mind ran through the years. 38 years of work, taking extra warehouse shifts when Aaron needed books, odd jobs on weekends to cover his Silverford University fees. I remembered his call during a tuition hike, panic in his voice, my reply steady. "Don't worry, son, I'll handle it." And I did, trading my rest for his future. On his wedding day, Tasha smiled in her gown, Aaron grinned in his rented tux. They never knew the costs had doubled, and I'd covered the difference, paying for the music, the tiered vanilla cake, the hall. I'd chosen a modest life, letting them think I lived check to check while my investments grew quietly. My mind drifted to Gerald Winton. Over 2 decades ago, we'd shaken hands in his garage, $500,000 I'd put into his fledgling business, hidden as a loan. Now, Winton Dynamics employs thousands in Silverford State and Norhaven. Aaron's paycheck came from the very company I'd helped create, though he had no clue. I looked at the photo, on my nightstand. Aaron at 8, gap-toothed, holding the leather-bound journal I'd saved months to buy him. That boy had become a man ready to strip me of dignity. He'd mistaken kindness for weakness. Tomorrow, I'd agree to work, let them believe they'd won. Patience was my specialty, and I'd been practicing it for 64 years. The clock read just past midnight. In 6 hours, my lesson for Aaron would begin. Morning came. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Aaron stood by the counter in casual clothes. Tasha buttered toast. They both glanced up, guarded, but curious. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told him, settling into my chair. "You're right." Aaron froze mid-sip. Tasha's knife paused over the bread. They'd been braced for another argument. "Seriously?" Aaron asked, suspicion edging his tone. "What's the point in fighting? A man my age should contribute," I said evenly. They exchanged a quick look, surprised at my surrender. Aaron leaned against the counter, shoulders squaring. "There's a janitor at Winton Dynamics I can get you in." "That works for me," I answered before he could gloat too much. "You'd clean offices?" Tasha asked, eyebrows raised. "Honest work is honest work. When do I start?" Aaron puffed up a little. "Monday at sunrise. You'll do fine. No complaints, follow orders, grateful for the opportunity. It's minimum wage, but you take what you get, right?" I nodded as though the insult had rolled right past me. "I'll check with my boss, Gerald Winton, to get it approved," Aaron added. "He'll probably feel sorry for you." I let a trace of gratitude touch my voice. "That's generous of you." Inside, I could already picture Gerald's face when he learned what Aaron had just arranged. Tasha reached across the table and gave my hand a light, patronizing pat. "See, that wasn't so bad. You just had to face reality about where you stand." If only she knew the truth. I gave her a mild smile. "I appreciate you both helping me see things clearly. Feels good to have purpose again, something useful to add to the household." Aaron nodded, clearly pleased. "That's exactly the attitude we need. Maybe this will work out after all." He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the screen, likely ready to call Gerald Winton. I pictured Gerald's face when he heard the request. "I'll handle it this afternoon," Aaron said. "You'll start Monday at sunrise." "Perfect," I replied, already planning my return to Winton Dynamics, though not in the role Aaron imagined. They moved on to talking about errands and weekend plans. I let their words drift past me, too busy mapping out the next few days. Very soon, they'd learn that underestimating Martin Graves was an expensive mistake. The week passed in a blur of Aaron's smug preparations. He bragged to Gerald about solving his father's problem, bought me a cheap set of cleaning supplies, and outlined my duties as though reading from a manual. I played along, nodding with quiet approval, all the while counting down to the real show. When Monday came, the air was crisp and the light sharp. At 7:30 a.m., I sat in my kitchen, coffee in hand, newspaper open. Outside, neighbors headed to work, unaware that a quiet storm was about to roll through my house. The cleaning kit Aaron had bought still sat by the door, untouched. At 8:15, my phone rang hard. "Dad, where are you?" Aaron's voice was tight with panic. "My boss just tore into me. Gerald was waiting for the janitor, and no one showed." I let a flicker of confusion into my tone. "Oh, what time was I supposed to be there?" "8 o'clock. We've gone over this all week. How could you forget?" "Sorry, Aaron. At my age, things slip the mind. Brains don't work like they used to. This isn't about memory." His voice rose to a tense, raising pitch. "I vouched for you. Told Gerald you'd be reliable. Now I look like a fool." Perfect. I imagined Gerald's raised eyebrow, wondering why Aaron was so invested in hiring an elderly janitor. "I feel awful," I said in my best apologetic voice. "What did Gerald say?" "He wanted to know why I was involved. I told him you're my father, living at home and needed the job. It was humiliating." Interesting. Gerald had kept our connection to himself, even when presented with this absurd setup. "I could come in this afternoon to make up for it," I offered. "No, tomorrow, 7:45 sharp. My reputation's on the line. Don't make me regret this again." "Of course, son." When the call ended, I leaned back, letting satisfaction sink in. Phase 1 was complete. Aaron rattled, embarrassed, his authority already slipping. But I had other plans for today. At my desk, 2 manila folders waited, months of preparation. Inside were photographs I'd taken 2 months earlier, when Tasha left papers scattered on the kitchen counter, letterhead from Drayton Company Accounting. A quick glance had set off alarm bells. Office supply invoices bloated from $347 to $847. Maintenance costs doubled without reason. I'd spent decades reviewing budgets. These numbers screamed fraud. While she talked in the other room, I'd quietly photographed everything. That evening, I called an old friend, Calvin Hurst, a skilled corporate auditor who still owed me a favor. "Calvin, check the real supply expenses at Drayton Company for the last 6 months, I asked. 3 days later, he delivered the truth. Authentic reports showing the exact theft I suspected. Tasha had been padding invoices, funneling the difference into her own pocket, and doing it with precision over several months. Now, at my computer, I laid the forged reports beside the originals. The pattern was neat, deliberate, and criminal. I began typing. "Dear Mr. Drayton, I am writing to report serious irregularities in your expense accounts. Your employee, Tasha Graves, has been inflating office supply and maintenance costs and diverting the excess. Evidence attached." A concerned party. I double-checked the attachments, confirmed the anonymous account I'd set up, and hovered my finger over send. For a moment, I hesitated, finger hovering above the key. Sending that email would almost certainly end Tasha's career, and maybe her freedom. Aaron would be left with an unemployed wife staring down a criminal investigation, and their carefully balanced finances would collapse. Then I heard it again in my mind, their laughter drifting through the thin wall, their voices casually planning to dump me in a nursing home, their dismissal of the man who had built the foundation for their comfortable lives. I pressed send. The message vanished into the digital ether, carrying the seeds of their undoing. Within hours, possibly before dinner, their world would begin to crack apart from a side they never saw coming. I closed the laptop, fed the last of the paper copies into the shredder, and listened to the satisfying whir as months of quiet preparation turned into thin, curling strips. The kitchen was drenched in warm afternoon light. I made a simple sandwich, sat at the table, and let the silence wrap around me. Christopher had wanted to teach me about reality. Now he'd learned I'd been holding my own insurance policy all along. This was just the opening move. The real game was still unfolding. In my study, sunlight spilled over 2 neat piles of documents. On the left, the falsified expense reports I'd photographed from our kitchen table. On the right, the real records Calvin Hurst had pried loose from Drayton Company's archives. Side by side, they told a perfect, damning story. 8 months of small, precise thefts. Tasha hadn't been greedy enough to trigger alarms, just clever enough to skim in amounts that flew under the radar. $347 worth of supplies became $847 on paper. $1,234 for computer maintenance became $1,734 in her reports. She'd even gone so far as to fabricate entire vendors for services rendered that never existed. By my count, she'd siphoned off nearly $18,000, enough to fund her expensive handbags and unexplained shopping sprees. I opened the anonymous email account, typed the final version of my message, and attached 28 pieces of irrefutable evidence: the doctored reports, the authentic ones, the photographs from our table, and a clean timeline showing the theft in sequence. When I clicked send, the silence afterward was sharp, almost electric. Somewhere downtown, an email alert was about to drop into Mr. Drayton's inbox, and within minutes, the quiet unraveling would begin. By 6:43 p.m., the front door slammed open. Rapid heels crossed the hardwood floor. I looked up from my newspaper as Tasha appeared in the doorway. Her face was blotchy, her mascara smeared into faint black trails beneath her eyes. Her blouse was creased, hair falling loose from its bun, hands trembling around her purse strap. "Tasha, what happened?" I rose halfway from my chair, my voice a blend of concern and disbelief. Her breath caught. "I'm facing termination." I stepped closer, brow furrowed. "Termination? For what?" "Someone sent my boss documents, financial records. They think I've been stealing." I let my face tighten in carefully measured shock. "That's awful. Who would do something like that?" "I don't know." She collapsed into the armchair, shaking. "It was anonymous, but detailed, like a forensic report. Dates, amounts, even photographs of my files. Doug, they've been watching me for months." I sat back slowly, keeping my tone sympathetic but neutral. "That's extraordinary. But surely this is just a misunderstanding. You've always been honest." "That's the problem," she said, her voice breaking. "The evidence is too precise, too clean. Whoever it is, they knew exactly what to look for." "Have you told Aaron?" I asked softly. She shook her head. "No. He's already upset about you missing your first day. If I tell him now..." Her gaze locked on mine, desperate and hollow. "If they fire me, if there are charges, we'll lose everything. Now, I said softly, resting a hand on Tasha's shoulder in a grandfatherly gesture. "We'll figure this out together. Family supports family, right?" The irony almost made me laugh. The same woman who had plotted to dump me in a nursing home was now clinging to me for comfort, her world collapsing in real time. "They've suspended me pending a full investigation," she said, sniffling into a tissue. "Mr. Drayton said the evidence was too compelling to ignore. They're bringing in external auditors, reviewing every single transaction I've handled for the past year." External auditors. Good. Calvin Richardson had done his job perfectly. His documentation would match my allegations down to the decimal. "Is there any chance this could be resolved quietly?" I asked, tilting my head in sympathy. "Perhaps if you spoke to Mr. Drayton directly, explained your side." "My side?" She laughed bitterly. "What side?" "The documents don't lie, Aaron. Someone built an airtight case against me, and I have no idea who or why." The sound of Aaron's car in the driveway cut through the room. The front door opened, and his footsteps crossed the porch. "Please," she whispered urgently, "let me tell him myself. He's going to be devastated." I gave a slow nod and leaned back in my chair, ready for the final act. "I'm home," Aaron's voice called from the entryway, followed by heavy steps down the hall. He appeared in the doorway, tie loosened, shirt creased, and his expression shifted instantly from fatigue to alarm when he saw her red, tear-streaked face. "What did you do to her, old man?" barked, dropping his briefcase. "Aaron," I began. "Don't lie to me." His voice shot up, sharp enough to cut. "First you humiliate me at work, now you've upset my wife. What is wrong with you?" "Aaron," Tasha tried weakly, "it's not your father." "Then what is it?" He spun toward her, eyes hard, the same way I imagined he looked at subordinates who'd missed a deadline. They want to fire me," she blurted. "Someone sent anonymous evidence to Mr. Drayton, accusing me of embezzlement. They've suspended me." Aaron's face was drained of color. He sat down heavily. That's impossible. You're the most honest person I know. That's what I told them, she said, leaning forward. But whoever did this, they knew exactly what to look for. Expense reports, bank records, every detail is documented. I watched him cycle through disbelief, denial, and finally, the creeping panic of a man who realized his control over life was slipping. This can't be happening, he muttered, running both hands through his hair. Not now. Not when... When what? Tasha asked. Aaron's eyes flicked to me, burning with resentment. When my father here decided to play games, didn't show up for work yesterday after I personally vouched for him, made me look like a complete amateur. I told you it was just confusion about the time, I started. No more excuses, he shouted, jabbing a finger in my direction. Tomorrow, you're coming with me. No tricks, no senior moments, no nonsense. I'm driving you there myself to make sure you show up. That's not necessary. It is, he snapped, voice cracking with anger. I'm done with both of you wrecking everything. My job, my marriage, my life. If you embarrass me one more time, I'll make good on my promises. Pension gone, nursing home. You understand me? I nodded solemnly, suppressing the smile tugging at my lips. Tomorrow will be different, I said evenly. Something in my tone made him hesitate. For a brief moment, the fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced by unease. It better be, he said finally, before stalking out of the room. The house settled into heavy silence. 3 people, each convinced they were fighting their own separate battles, and none of them realizing the war was being orchestrated by the man they thought was harmless. The next morning came far too quickly for Aaron, but I slept like a man with nothing to fear. This was the final act, the reveal. I dressed slowly, pulling on the janitor's uniform he'd bought me. Every piece was a costume for what was about to happen. He was in the kitchen when I arrived, hunched over a mug of coffee. The stubble on his jaw, the dark rings under his eyes, the rigid set of his shoulders told me he'd slept little. Ready? He asked curtly. Ready? I said, slipping on the jacket. The first 10 minutes of the drive passed in tense silence, the morning traffic giving him something to grip his anger onto. Let me make something crystal clear, he finally said. No confusion today, no convenient illnesses. You show up, you work, you make me look competent. Yesterday almost cost me my job. Leonard was asking questions. Poor Leonard. I imagined him, sitting in his office, wondering why his longtime business partner's son was so determined to hire his own father for a janitor's job. And no tricks, Aaron went on, voice tightening with each word. I know you, and I know you think this is some game you can manipulate, but those days are over. From now on, I'm in charge. I let a faint note of quiet confidence slip into my voice. Don't worry, son. Today, everything will be different. That earned me a sharp look, suspicion flickering across his face. What's that supposed to mean? Only that I see things more clearly now, I said evenly. Sometimes you have to let the fog lift before the truth comes into focus. The Winton Dynamics headquarters rose ahead, a sleek glass and steel monument to decades of success. Aaron's eyes shone with a blend of pride and nerves. 3,000 employees, multi-million-dollar operation. This is where real men work, Dad. This is what success looks like. Indeed it did. And today, Aaron would find out just how much of that success he owed to me. He parked near the main entrance, cutting the engine with a hand that trembled ever so slightly. Remember, he said, turning to me, I do the talking. You stay quiet, respectful, grateful for the chance. Understood? Of course, I replied, biting back a smile at the absurdity of being coached on how to enter my own company. We stepped inside the polished stone atrium, the air cool and faintly scented with fresh flowers. Aaron strode ahead, giving the security guard a confident nod. The man waved us through, another system I'd designed years earlier. Stay close, Aaron muttered. I'll handle it from here. The corridor bustled with morning energy, employees clutching coffee, trading updates, rushing toward meetings. Some familiar faces passed us without a second glance, their eyes skipping over the older man in a janitor's uniform trailing behind a mid-level supervisor. Aaron stopped at the supply closet, grabbed a mop and bucket, and shoved them into my hands with a thin smirk. Make it look authentic when Mr. Winton sees you. I took them without comment, amused by the theater of it all. There he is, Aaron said suddenly, straightening his tie. Gerald Winton was coming down the hallway, his silver hair immaculate, tablet in hand, moving with the easy authority of a man who'd built an empire. At 64, he was still sharp-eyed and deliberate. "Mr. Winton," Aaron called warmly. "Perfect timing, sir." Gerald looked up, distracted at first, then focused on Aaron. His gaze slid to me, just a quick glance, then froze. He stopped walking altogether. "Aaron," Gerald's voice carried a note of disbelief. "You brought him here?" "Yes, sir," Aaron said, puffing up. "Solved our staffing problem and my family problem in one move. Here's my father, the new janitor." The words hung in the air, absurd and fragile. Recognition flared in Gerald's eyes, hardening into something colder. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he asked quietly. Aaron's smile faltered. "Sir, you brought Martin Graves, one of the largest shareholders of this company, into my building carrying a mop. And you're proud of yourself?" The blood drained from Aaron's face. That's impossible. "Over 2 decades ago, your father invested $500,000 into my startup," Gerald said, his voice sharp enough to silence the corridor. "Without him, there would be no Winton Dynamics. And without him, there would be no job for you. Which, by the way, you just lost." I don't understand." "You're fired," Gerald cut in. "Clear out your office. Security will escort you out." The words hit like a wrecking ball. Aaron's briefcase slipped from his hands and struck the stone floor with a crack that turned heads up and down the hall. Gerald turned to me, the anger gone, replaced by concern. "Martin, my friend, what is going on here?" I set down the mop and straightened, shedding the hunched posture I'd worn like armor. My voice came out steady and commanding, the way it had in boardrooms years ago. "Gerald, I think we should speak privately. In your suite." We walked into his boardroom suite together, rich mahogany desk, panoramic skyline windows, and decades of framed victories lining the walls. It was time to finish what I'd started. As we stepped inside Gerald's office, my eyes caught the familiar photographs on the walls, images of him and me side by side at company milestones, frozen proof of a partnership Aaron had never imagined. Aaron Traus yelled in behind us like a man in a trance, his face still pale from the public revelation. He collapsed into a leather chair without invitation, staring at his hands as though they belonged to someone else. "Martin, please," Gerald said, gesturing toward the chair opposite his desk, the very seat where I'd spent years discussing strategy and shaping the future of this company. He turned his attention to Aaron. "Perhaps someone can explain to me why my business partner was just introduced as a janitor by his own son." I leaned back, the years of pretense finally falling away. "Gerald, my family has been under the impression that I'm financially dependent on them. They've been less than charitable in their assessment of my worth." "Less than charitable?" Gerald's voice sharpened. "Aaron, your father owns 37% of this company. He's been drawing dividends for decades, not because he needs the money, but because that's how investments work. What did you think he did all this time?" Aaron's voice was barely a whisper. "Factory work. Odd jobs. I thought he was poor." "Poor?" Gerald let out a short, humorless laugh. "Your father could buy and sell half the business district. He chose to live modestly. He chose to let you believe whatever you wanted. And apparently, he chose to let you treat him like a burden." The truth hung in the air like a weight finally unshackled. Out the window, the city skyline stretched across the horizon, a view my early investment had helped Gerald afford. "But why?" Aaron asked, meeting my eyes for the first time since the hallway. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to see what kind of man you'd become without money's influence," I said calmly. I wanted to know if you'd respect your father for who he was, not for what he owned. Sadly, the answer is clear. Gerald's gaze swept over Aaron with visible disappointment. Let me be sure I have this right. You found out your father had retired, and your answer was to force him into menial labor? We couldn't afford. You couldn't afford it. Gerald's voice rose. Your father paid for your education, your wedding, your first home, all from his share of this company's profits, and you repaid that generosity by threatening to dump him in a nursing home. Aaron's face collapsed under the weight of it. I didn't know. No one told me. No one had to tell you to treat your father with decency, I said quietly. That's supposed to come naturally. Gerald stepped to the window, looking down at the parking lot. Martin, what do you want me to do here? Nothing more than what's been done, I replied. Aaron's no longer employed here. His wife will face her own consequences for what she's done. That's another matter entirely. Aaron's head jerked up. You knew about Tasha? I know everything, son. I always have. I rose, feeling taller than I had in years. The question now is, what will you do with this knowledge? The room fell silent, save for the hum of business carrying on below. Aaron sat surrounded by the symbols of success he'd never understood, finally seeing the man he had misjudged. Gerald crossed to me and set a hand on my shoulder. Martin, you're always welcome here. This is your company as much as mine. Thank you, Gerald, I said, but I think it's time I truly retire. This time on my own terms. I turned to Aaron one last time. Maybe this will teach you something about respect, humility, and the difference between being poor and choosing to live simply. His mouth opened, but no words came. Some things couldn't be undone. Gerald held the door open for me as we left. Justice has been restored, he said quietly. Indeed, I answered. After a week of threats, humiliation, and deception, I stood exactly where I belonged, not as a burden, but as Martin Graves, businessman, partner, and a man whose dignity had never truly been lost. The truth was out, respect restored, justice served,